I absolutely love the way of life here. The sort of arts and culture side of things I think is phenomenal.
Welcome to Island Influencers, where we share stories of successful business owners, experienced professionals, entrepreneurs and community leaders based or with influence in the Isle of Man. This podcast is brought to you by Thornton Chartered Financial Planners, because great financial planning has the power to change your life. Now here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner Sharon Sutton.
Welcome to Island Influencers. My guest this week is Jo Overty, who is responsible for the running of the Isle of Man Unesco Biosphere. Jo worked in banking briefly and journalism before joining the Isle of Man government in 2006 as a communications officer and event organiser. After roles in the Department of Education, Sport and Culture and the Cabinet Office, Jo has worked for Unesco Biosphere Isle of Man since March 2018. She gained an intensive qualification in biosphere management in 2020. Jo's a Test cricket fan, a keen amateur photographer and a Radio 4 addict, so she's in good company. Here's this week's conversation with Jo Overty in episode 59 of Island Influencers. Jo Overty, welcome to Island Influencers, and thank you very much for coming on to the programme. And I mean, we've been trying to set this up for a while, haven't we? Because there was a strategy that you were wanting to launch, and we'll talk a bit about that today. But lovely to have you on the programme.
Thank you. Nice to finally be here. Thank you.
It is. It's great to finally meet you here on the programme. I mean, just for the benefit of our listeners, would you like to take us through where you've come from in the past and where you were born, where you grew up, and your journey? Tell us all about you.
I was born in Leicester in 1967, inner city Leicester, a city of some 400,000 people with a fantastic Roman and medieval history. Yeah, I was really lucky to have been born in a really massively multicultural society and community.
Yeah, it is Leicester, isn't it? Yeah.
Many sort of, at that time, second, third generation people from the Indian subcontinent, from Africa and from Eastern Europe.
Right.
Were my friends growing up. So
fantastic.
I grew up in a fantastic place where, we were able to celebrate each other's cultures and calendar events and food stuffs and things like that. And I'm really grateful for that. I think that gave me a really great start in life.
Sure. Quite different to growing up in the Isle of Man.
Very, very. And, it's really sort of set me up for life, really, I think. I went to quite a sort of forbidding looking, what used to be a girls' grammar school until our motley crew turned up, and it had turned into a secondary modern.
Oh,
so
right.
It was still full of sort of school moms who were a bit sort of disapproving of having this, mixed collection of kids suddenly thrust upon them. And
I can't even imagine.
I remember sitting in assemblies with the girls, who were still the girls' grammar school years, sort of kicking our chairs from behind, and sort of general sort of generally disdainful about us. That was fine. And all the way through school, I think I knew that I wanted to be a newspaper reporter. I think journalist is quite a highfalutin term, one perhaps best saved for people who are out in war zones and places like that. But where other people kind of played with dolls and stuff like that, I would grab a notebook and pretend to interview someone, or be writing a story or an article about someone, or asking them nosy questions.
Gosh.
So I kind of knew from an early age that's what I wanted to do, although the careers teachers always do their best to dissuade you from anything like that at the time.
I can't imagine why.
And then I did my first work experience with the Leicester Mercury, which was absolutely fantastic. I remember going to Twycross Zoo with a reporter who sort of really took me under her wing, and we did a piece with the chimpanzees who did I think it was the PG Tips advert tea advert, and we interviewed Johnny Morris, who was kind of legendary sort of
Animal Magic,
yes, that's right.
That ages us, doesn't it?
We're showing our age, aren't we? And so that was me sold on journalism. I just wanted to be a newspaper reporter or a journalist from that very early age, really.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So what happened then? Did you go off to university?
I didn't go to university. I left home very early for sort of personal circumstances, I suppose. And so I worked in a factory at night to kind of support myself through sixth form during the day.
So at 16 you did that?
So, I think that taught me resilience, and it taught me the value of hard work.
Yeah, no kidding. Having to buy food for yourself and support yourself.
But I had a fantastic landlady who, had a really kind of, made a lasting impression on my life, really. at the time and really kind of looked after me and another girl who she'd sort of, another waif and stray that she'd sort of taken in. I managed to scrape together some not great grade A-levels, it has to be said. And then I went to work in an estate agent, first of all, and then to work in a bank, kind of follow those traditional routes. I think I knew that banking wasn't for me on the day that I left £750,000 outside the back door for half a day in a street in a city centre, Leicester. How they deliver the cash and you take it in, and I kind of knew that time that I wasn't destined for a long-term career in banking. And by mutual consent, So
it didn't get nicked? No,
amazingly, no, right, okay. No, that could have been the end of me. But and so I applied for a place on a course run by the National Council for the Training of Journalists, which was then and is still now this sort of industry standard accredited body for training journalists. And this was before the days where there were lots and lots of media study courses all over the country. They had about 5 or 6 centres that you could attend, and I was one of 600 applicants for 20 places.
That's amazing.
So I really didn't think I would get in. By some miracle, they took me in, and so I moved up to Sheffield, and again, had a fantastic year in Sheffield.
It's amazing.
Learning to be a journalist with all that involved. First week, they took us to attend a post-mortem because they wanted to sort of harden us up. Shortly after that, they kind of deposited us in the middle of nowhere with no money and said, make your way back to Sheffield and bring 5 news stories with you. But we got to do all sorts of great things. We got to interview celebrities. We got to go and cover Sheffield Wednesday games. And, we got the whole sort of broad experience of learning to be a local newspaper reporter. And some of our lecturers were, real old school tabloid journalists of the past. They worked on the Daily Mirror and the Daily Mail and publications like that, So we were learning from the very best, I would say. So, great year. A lot of misspent time disappearing off to Manchester and Liverpool and other cities to watch concerts. And
what's the best band you
Oh, do you know, I think actually, although I didn't like their music and I just kind of went by accident, and I still don't really, I wouldn't turn them on and listen to them now. I think the best showman and the best band I ever saw was In Excess.
Right.
Michael Hutchins. He was amazing. Yeah, but I was just sort of dragged along to that by a friend. I was into all the sort of 90s, 80s and 90s indie music and that kind of thing.
So who did you see from the 80s?
All over that period, we were sort of into The Mission and All About Eve, and trying to think, Lloyd Cole and the Commotions. We used to follow him around the country, poor guy. I think he thought we were his stalkers. So we took advantage of sort of being in the north of England and that great sort of, ability to go to cities and see culture, and often just scraping back into Sheffield in time to start classes the following morning. And my shorthand suffered. I never did master shorthand.
I'm sure your shorthand is better than 99.9% people on the planet, though. And so did you manage to interview anybody famous during that time?
I think possibly not during that time, during my time as a trainee journalist. But obviously, later on during my long career with Isle of Man newspapers, I was with Isle of Man newspapers for 18 years. And how that came about was I didn't know what I was going to do at the end of my journalism qualification or where I would go, and I was very ambitious. I won the Esso Northern Young Journalist of the Year, and I kind of imagined myself in Fleet Street or whatever that, the modern day equivalent of that is, because that doesn't exist anymore. But I saw an advert popped up on the college notice board in January 1988 for an Easter placement at Isle of Man newspapers, and I'm ashamed to say I'm one of those people who didn't really know where the Isle of Man was. Is it that one up there, or is it that one down there? Bit of a clue when the plane ticket came through, and it was from Liverpool, so that was good. And I came over along with a girl I didn't know from a completely different course for 2 weeks at Easter 1988, and it was a glorious Easter. It was April, it was warm and sunny.
I remember that one.
It was a late Easter. I think we often have best weather in April here, don't we? And I remember sitting on Peel Harbour in my shorts in beautiful heat, palm trees, and I remember thinking, this is the place for me, I'm definitely going to move here. This is like being abroad. And at the end of the 2-week placement, we worked incredibly hard. They didn't sort of give us a day off or anything, and they sent us off scurrying around after all sorts of stories. And I remember doing a review of something at the Villa Marina, and all sorts of stuff. I was offered a job and I accepted it, and I was really delighted. And I got home, and on the doormat were offers of interviews with the Liverpool Echo and the Belfast Telegraph, which are 2 major provincial titles. Which daily, evening titles, which would have been great. But I'd committed to the Isle of Man by then, and I have absolutely no regrets. I'm really glad that I did.
Gosh. Yeah, because blimey, those two. I mean, what was the Isle of Man newspapers, and those? Well,
yeah, I think it was a great grounding in journalism or newspaper reporting, because you got to do a bit of everything. I think if you go to a really big title, you start out, you're maybe stuck in a corner, and you do the WI coverage, or you do the courts or something like that. We got to do a bit of absolutely everything, So I sort of crafted my trade over here, and for 18 years, I started off as a junior reporter. I became chief reporter, and then eventually deputy editor and news editor. It was a privileged insight into people's lives, really. It was you tended to meet people when they are either at their best or their worst. Either something fantastic has happened to them, and that's why you're encountering them, or something really bad has happened to them, and that's why you kind of cross paths with them. And I loved meeting people and talking to people. Still do. That was the very best part of the job. And so I think my happiest days were as a reporter, getting out and about with that notebook and with my beige Mac, which I thought I have to have a beige Mac if I'm a reporter. It's my prized possession.
And your hat.
I think it fell apart in the end. Got to meet so many people. And so it's kind of weird. Like, I know half the island, really.
Yeah, I bet you do. Yeah. So what was your best interview? Do you think? Well, the most exciting one you got to do.
I think the stories that I liked covering were where I could make a difference to somebody. Yeah. Yes, we did things like royal visits, and we had celebs who came over to the Gaiety and, that kind of stuff. But I think I liked it when someone came to you with a problem, and in some small way you were able to help solve it. Yeah. And, just a tiny example that springs to mind, it's probably not the best one, is a group of school, a sort of community group wanted to use a local school to raise money for a charity for a sick child, and they discovered that they were going to have to pay, I think it was £600 to hire the school hall, so the whole event was called off, and we featured it, and I opened my mail a couple of days later, and out came a cheque for £600, from an anonymous donor saying we really want to help, and just sort of easing the way for people a little bit. I was once invited to a party by Prince Charles. That was quite an occasion. Yeah. I'd been traipsing around after him all day, several feet behind as you are, and sort of catching up with the people who he's spoken to and saying, "What did he say to you?" And and doing all that stuff. And I remember we were down at Cregneash, and there was a big fancy do on the Royal Yacht Britannia, which was moored in Douglas Bay. And, I'd been going around after him all day, so I was just wearing sort of ordinary clothes and flat shoes and stuff. And he sort of came over to me and he said, "What are you doing later?" And I said, I was speechless, really. I said, "Well, come along to this thing on the, So I remember having to ring through to Douglas. "Can someone run down to Strand Street and buy me some shoes quickly?"
What size? Doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, just any shoes. Stuff like that. No 2 days were ever the same.
That's amazing.
And it was good. It was good fun. Yeah. It was a great way to get to know the Isle of Man and all its nooks and crannies and its people and its ways. So.
Yes. Nigel Mansell, you would have been around when he was world champion, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I did interview Nigel a couple of times. Or sort of, sort of in a press pack, for want of a better word. When he won the Formula One World Championship I think it was in Hungary, he unexpectedly flew back to the island that night. And so I was the only journalist really there, sort of waiting at arrivals at Ronaldsway, waiting to greet him. And I managed to squeeze a few words out of him. Yeah. And he did the sort of big official sort of press call the following day down at the golf links. But also, I didn't really ever try to sell any of my stories to the UK nationals. Some people made a bit of extra money on the side by doing that, but I didn't really ever sort of have the time or energy to bother with that stuff. But I remember doing a story about a windbreak that he built.
Was it you?
That was me. Yes, that was me. Sorry, Nigel, to this day I feel bad. So, without planning permission or something like that, he put up this construction at his house. And so the national press ran the story, "Nigel Mansell breaks wind illegally," and I remember getting a couple of checks from UK national newspapers for that. So.
That was so funny. Yeah, it was Mansell breaks wind. I remember that. That's one of the most famous headlines that I can remember in Isle of Man newspaper history.
Yeah, so
well done.
But no, he was a nice guy.
Yeah, okay, that's great. So you left Isle of Man newspapers to join government in 2006, didn't you? So what did you do then?
That's right. Yeah, I was I was keying in, I think, my 18th or 19th set of Laxey Duck Race results in the newsroom at Isle of Man newspapers, and it's a fine institution, the Laxey Duck Race. Don't get me wrong, it's a great community event. But I just thought it was time for me to do something different now.
First official gig for the pipe band. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
Yes, but yes, it's a great institution. I love that it keeps going. A job came up in government which was right up my street. It was communications, event organising, because anybody who knows me knows I like a bit of a list, and a bit of fuss potting, and secretary to the Board of Education. So it was sort of 3 jobs rolled into one, and it was absolutely delightful. And so yes, I was the classic poacher turned gamekeeper who kind of went from being a journalist, scrutinising government, to working in government communication, which was great. And the event side of things, I organised things like the dolphin swimming gala and another fine institution, and conferences for teachers and showcases of education work, and all of that stuff, visiting sort of dignitaries, rotas, and a lot of outward in projects. So if people would approach education with a project, it would kind of come through me, and we would make sure it happened successfully and that kind of thing. And so I was in education for a good number of very happy years. And I really, not having had children and not having had anyone of my own going through the education system, I didn't know that much about it, but I came to have a massive respect for all those who work in education and how hard they work over here. And then in 2014, when government was rationalised slightly, I was taken off into the Cabinet Office Central Communications team, which was another great challenge, working right at the heart of government, right in the sort of engine room there, right alongside the Chief Minister, and sort of seeing policy evolving and trying to communicate it out to the public. So that was great. Then just over 3 years ago, I went out initially on secondment, but eventually permanently to my current job, which is the project officer for Unesco Biosphere Isle of Man. So that's been my trip through government, through 3 departments and counting.
Brilliant. So that's super. And so tell us about your role in the Biosphere.
It's a huge, enormous privilege to work for a Unesco project being delivered in the Isle of Man. I can't think of it's a unique job. It's a job that nobody else in the world has quite like mine, because every biosphere is completely different.
Yes.
If people haven't heard of the Unesco Man and the Biosphere programme, then they've probably heard of the sister programme World Heritage Sites. The biospheres are places where the needs of people and nature are balanced, basically. And the UNESCO Biosphere programme champions 3 things. It champions sustainable development, because UNESCO accepts that people need to work and to live and to consume and to travel and all of those things that we have to do in our everyday lives, but it's how you do them, and whether you can do them in a more sustainable way. It champions conservation, but that doesn't necessarily just mean conservation of habitats and species, conservation of the less tangible things like culture and heritage and our way of life, what makes us the Isle of Man. And then the third aspect is learning, or education, and I see that as the bridge between the two, really. We need to conserve things, we need to grow, albeit sustainably, and it's how we do that. But all biospheres are very different. There are 714 biospheres in 129 countries, and they're different politically, geographically, have different ecosystems, have different priorities, different industries. And so locally we have our own strategy too, which is working together for a sustainable future, which is hopefully something we can all subscribe to. We all want a sustainable future. We want to live and meet our needs today, but we want to be able to do that tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and for our children and our grandchildren to be able to do that. And our work is now delivered under the headings of economy, education, environment, enjoyment and engagement. And so we accept that Biosphere can be a complicated ethos for people to understand, but I think it's a great platform for us as an island in terms of how we make policy, and the decisions we all make as individuals, as groups, as organisations, as businesses and as a government, so it underpins everything that we're doing really as we strive to be more sustainable.
Yeah, no, it sounds like, would you say, if I said being stewards of where we are, and we need to leave the place in a better place,
absolutely.
But leave it in a better place than we found it.
Totally, and I think we're all becoming much more aware of those issues now, aren't we? And of climate change and of the other sort of changes that we need to make. And I think as a biosphere, it's the fact that we are a biosphere drives us forward, drives us to make those good decisions, accepting that good will be different to different people. And we may not all be in agreement on that. There is no list anywhere in the world to say in a biosphere you can do this, and this, and you can't do this, and this, because as I say, they're all so dramatically different. But it's about that sort of journey, if you like, towards a more sustainable future, underpinning that.
So what's unique about the Isle of Man biosphere?
The Isle of Man is the only entire nation biosphere in the world, and so that's our sort of USP, for want of a better word. Actually 87% of our biosphere is sea, so obviously our marine protection and that kind of thing is very, very important to us. We operate very holistically. Some biospheres concentrate on one area of work, perhaps it's connecting people up with nature for well-being, or perhaps it's local indigenous food and craft promotion, or, perhaps preservation of a certain habitat or species.
Yeah.
We operate very, very holistically. So we try to work with all sectors, and we try to have programs and initiatives that involve everybody in the Isle of Man, because it belongs to everybody in the Isle of Man. We're all citizens of a UNESCO biosphere, which I think is quite exciting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, very inclusive.
Yes, and it's not just about what I deliver and the two of us on the project, what we deliver out. It's about what everybody does. The actions we all take and the decisions we all make in the Isle of Man.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So, and you see on certain straplines of companies that they're a proud member of the Biosphere. I mean, how do you get to be part of that?
That's right. I mean, one of the most inclusive, one of the ways we have of reaching a lot of people is our partnership scheme. We have nearly 300 organisations now signed up as Biosphere partners, and they take the Biosphere pledge to, kind of look after the economy and the environment, and to be culturally aware and aware of heritage and aware of our community, and kind of support those initiatives where they can. It's very broad based. So it's not a hallmark of perfection. Nobody comes around with a clipboard and kind of audits you every year or something. And that's you as an organisation, however large or small, sort of saying, we want to be part of this drive towards a more sustainable Isle of Man, and we're prepared to do our bit. Yeah. We deliberately kind of keep it free and easy to apply, and we want as many organisations on board,
yes,
a part of the journey. So you do not have to be perfect. I don't think any biosphere in the world is perfect, and neither will it ever be. So
it's been on my to-do list for a while. I will apply. Thornton will apply.
I'll oversee it before I leave. Yeah. You'll be very welcome.
Yeah, I know. Great. So, what would be your, I suppose, main goals for it whilst you're doing this role? What's is there any specific project? I mean, I know you've just launched your strategy, your new strategy, which we'll feature. We'll put in the show notes a link to it so that listeners can access it.
I think it's really just to encourage that good decision making all the way down the line. To kind of acknowledge what we have here, whether it be environmentally or culturally or heritage wise, because part of it is it's sometimes we're so close to something we can't actually see how great the Isle of Man is. So acknowledging what we have and recognizing that need to protect and preserve it for the future, and getting people on board to take positive actions in their everyday lives to do that. And ultimately, if it's a driver for good decision making now and in the future, then that's great.
If we could encourage our listeners to do one thing to help it, what would it be?
I think that's different for absolutely everybody. I mean, one of our sort of, top three sort of regular queries is we may have a company or business on the phone to say, how do I become more sustainable? And I say, I don't know your business. I don't know your industry. I don't know what you waste and what you don't waste and how you travel and how you consume. And we're actually just, in the next couple of weeks, actually launching a pilot series of 6 workshops for businesses called Sustainable Man.
Fantastic.
To kind of give that entry point for businesses, particularly businesses actually in this case, who want to do the right thing, but are just too busy or too time pressed, to kind of get in that expertise themselves. So it's a pilot, and we're going to see how it goes.
Superb.
We've got a good take up so far from small to medium enterprises and larger businesses in the Isle of Man.
You'll have to send us a link.
Yes, definitely. Well, we do have places left. So.
Yeah, well, being out at St John's where you are, it makes perfect sense to be.
And some of the sessions are actually being held at St John's Mill as well. So
right. Well, no excuse then, is there, Joe? Really,
that's just one of a good number of initiatives that we have. We work with everyone from children in schools to community groups to businesses. Everyone has their part to play, really.
Yeah, it gives you a whole new perspective on island life. If you don't mind me asking, and primarily I ask this in my day job, in my role as a financial planner, what's your earliest memory of money? I mean, how was money growing up?
I remember we didn't have very much money. Grew up in a council house. My mum was a cleaner. My dad worked in a factory. Extremely hard-working people, and I'm very proud of my background. I'm a very working class person still, I think. But we didn't want for anything. I don't recall us ever going without anything, which looking back I think must have been down to the sacrifices that my parents made for us at the time. We managed a holiday every year, which was great.
Yeah.
I do remember actually in junior school having the man from the TSB would come, and he came monthly, and sometimes we could save £1 or sometimes we could save 50 pence, or it may have been a little bit more than that or something, and we had a little black book. You used to have actual bank books that people wrote in and signed alongside your deposits. And
I remember that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've no idea whether this was like a cross Leicestershire education initiative, or whether it was just that my head teacher had shares in TSB or something. But anyway, the man from the TSB came, and, I felt so proud every time I sort of saved 50 pence or £1 or something. And I stayed with that bank when I started work, even though I worked for a different bank, actually. I stayed with that bank. And then that bank evolved into Lloyds TSB. And then over here, finally, it was sort of became Lloyds. So I finally sort of severed the TSB connection. But it just goes to show you that a bit of early marketing there really paid off. Like, customer for life.
Yes, indeed. Great. I mean, of all the things that you've done throughout your life so far, what's given you the most fulfillment?
Oh, I've really been thinking about this. I mean, I wasn't the most academic person. As I say, I scraped a few sort of mediocre A levels, and I got a couple of slightly better ones later down the line. I suppose education and qualification-wise, I won with a team the first Manx Executive Challenge, the Institute of Directors Manx Executive Challenge, which I remember being extremely hard for me, not having done any learning for years, and suddenly being pitched in with 5 total strangers, and a huge problem to solve. And I sort of got various management qualifications through government. Last Christmas, I obtained a qualification in Biosphere management, a very intensive, short qualification. I mean, it's nothing major, but I was probably the only civil servant in the office on Christmas Day and Boxing Day, because the deadline for the assignment was Boxing Day night. So so that gave me some pleasure to have something underpinning what I do at work, a sort of qualification in that. Other than that, I think just it sounds really cheesy, I know, but just kind of being part of the community and trying to be helpful where you can. And I think those softer skills are really important.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's truly valuable. Thank you. So for any existing or aspiring business owner, community leader, entrepreneur, what would be your number one tip?
Well, I think because I come from a communications and marketing background, I'd sort of have to major it around that, really. Yeah. I would say use, don't get me wrong, I have no great business brain, I don't think, but I would say use all the tools available to you in terms of social media to communicate across to people. I occasionally sort of free of charge help people out, we're setting up businesses with just a bit of advice on social media and that kind of thing. And people often say to me, I don't have time to do the social media thing. And I said, that's like not having a shop window or something, make time, it's free, it's quick, it's easy. You can quite easily, using all the tools available to us these days, sort of cross-pollinate and kind of take time to know your customer and know what they're looking for from you, and kind of get yourself a little profile and a personality in that space. And, it will reap rewards, I think, in the end.
Yeah, and consistency around that, I guess, too. Is
indeed. And, I think a lot of people think it's a big, scary place and it's going to take up an awful lot of their time. But I think, it can be quite, rewarding, really, in a way. It's a form of creativity, I think, social media, if you get it right.
Are there any good tools that you would point people towards?
I would say don't use those tools where you put the same thing on every platform, because first of all the platforms are very, very different, and I think you need to speak to people differently on them.
Right.
I think know your personality, know what tone you're using, what your voice is, and stick with that.
Right,
if you've got half a dozen people in your organisation who are all posting very differently, your personality as a business won't shine through. So do you want to be playful? Do you want to be serious? Do you want to be, conservative or wacky? Or what is your business? And kind of decide all of that, really. So for me, it's about. I'm a communicator. I'm not a technical person, so I'm a switch it off and switch it back on again person. But I would say, kind of discover that first of all, and then the rest of it will follow. Yeah,
that's really valuable. Thank you. Yeah, it's good, wise words there. So what do you do to relax? I think you're going to tell me a bit about cricket, aren't you?
I'm afraid so. I don't. This question always makes me feel really dull whenever I'm asked this, because I'm a bit of a workaholic, and I've tended to have jobs where I work nights and weekends, and work a lot of hours. And so I've listening to some of your recent podcastees, and the massive array of hobbies and skills that they have. I feel very sort of envious of them, really. I like travelling, which has obviously been very constrained of late.
Yes,
it will come again. And I've been lucky enough to go to some wonderful places, although I'm not an adventurous traveller. I've never sort of climbed up Machu Picchu or done any of that stuff, but maybe that's all to come in later life, who knows. One of my biggest hobbies is watching Test cricket at home or abroad. So Test cricket is the longer form of the game for the uninitiated, the one that goes on for 5 days, and sometimes. And And so to be able to combine the two, really, my partner and I love to do that, to go to some far-flung place, see a few of the sites, and have that sort of anchor point of a game of cricket. So
tell me some stories about your cricket escapades then.
Well, we haven't been everywhere. We're members of the Barmy Army, which is the official England supporters club. And I think at home the Barmy Army has a bit of a reputation, or that maybe they're, sort of very loud at the games or sort of chucking the beer around or whatever. But the actual, the Barmy Army itself is a club and full of real cricket aficionados. These people are sort of, brain surgeons and airline pilots and all the rest of it who just like to switch off and go and watch Test cricket, and they're so knowledgeable about the game. So when you travel with the Barmy Army, it really is superb. You tend to get looked after really well in the stadium, and everyone knows the Barmy Army, and it's just great fun and great camaraderie. And it's great to be. I just love to be on the coach to the game, talking about what might happen that day, and on the coach on the way back, talking about what did happen, and and so doing that in an overseas setting, is just absolutely highly recommended.
So how did you get your love of cricket?
My dad was. My dad, who died this year, actually was a really big, good sportsman, and he was actually on the books at Leicester City Football Club for a while, and he sort of played sort of semi-professional football, but he also played for the RAF National 11 at football and cricket. Gosh. So we were kind of brought up, and I have a brother, so we were kind of brought up on a diet of football and cricket, and I remember long hot summers where instead of playing outside, we'd have all the curtains closed and we'd be glued to whichever cricket test series we played that summer, and so as soon as I was able to, really, I would go down to Leicester City and watch football, and go down to Grace Road and watch cricket. That's Leicestershire's home ground, and it just kind of grew from there, really.
So a big Gary Lineker fan now.
I used to wait outside what was then Filbert Street for Gary Lineker. Poor man. I mean, and you can't imagine it these days getting anywhere near the players' cars, but in those days, it was all a lot more free and easy, and the players used to sort of sail in a couple of hours before the game. And I remember he had a tiny little red Alfa Romeo, and he used to get out of that, and week in, week out, he would sign an autograph for us and have a chat with us, before going in. Yeah, he was a lovely guy. And so big supporter of Leicester as well.
Well, that's lovely. So you say you've been to far-flung places. Where have you managed to go to overseas test matches?
Yeah, to watch cricket, we've been to South Africa a couple of times. We've been to Sri Lanka 3 times. We've been to some places in the Caribbean. We were due to do India last winter, but of course that wasn't to be because the series didn't go ahead. Obviously the holy grail for a cricket fan is the Ashes in Australia, and we are still hoping to do that this winter, but we're not sure whether or not it's going ahead. So we've got a few still to tick off.
Yeah, looks like Australia will be ripping off the Band-Aid for the COVID, doesn't it?
It's very difficult to know whether that series is even going to go ahead. But but no, I've been to loads of English grounds as well, and there's just nothing like sitting on the boundary on the first morning of a test match, kind of that frizz-on of excitement, waiting to see how the game's going to unfold over 15 sessions and 5 days, and I just love it. I really love it.
So are you one of these people who watches it on the telly and has the Radio 4 cricket commentary on the background?
Yeah, I sort of alternate between the two. I kind of try to support both, if that makes any sense. I do love Test Match Special. It's a real institution. It's absolutely fantastic. And been lucky enough to meet Jonathan Agnew a couple of times while travelling with the Barmy Army and stuff. So and somebody for Christmas once ahead of an Ashes series, because of course that's in the dead of night here, bought me a radio pillow, so that was a great invention. I've got a pillow that has a radio in it, so I could listen to Test Match Special all night. So a bit tired for work the next day, but anyway.
Indeed. So tell me, Jo, you're working at the Biosphere now, but I mean, what do you think are the best things about living in the Isle of Man? Because you've chosen to make your home here, so...
Yes. Yeah. When I first came over, I thought I would stay for a couple of years and move on, but I absolutely love the way of life here. I mean, there are the obvious things, the natural beauty of the island, the fact that we're not more than sort of 5 or 6 miles wherever we are from the sea. The fact that we can find solitude here, I think, is fantastic. Coming from a huge city as I did, there's so many places we can go to where we're just not going to be anywhere else. There's all of that, of course. I love the creativity of the island, which is, I think, partly inspired by the sort of natural surroundings. I'm just blown away constantly by how many creative people we have here. And just when you think you've heard of them all more, you hear of another one. And, so the sort of arts and culture side of things, I think, is is phenomenal here. Obviously, we've got a fantastic sporting pedigree here. You know, it was my privilege for a while to do communications for sport when I was communications for education, and, you know, learned so much about all the different sort of sporting achievements that the island has. And so I think we do so well in that area too. And you find people who do several things, don't you? You know, they're brilliant artists, but they're also a brilliant cyclist. So there's all of that. But I think, and I like the sort of entrepreneurial nature of the Isle of Man. I think, you know, as a kind of race or as an island, we're very sort of entrepreneurial and, you know, quick to try new things and be innovative. So I love that. But I think most of all, what I love about the island is something you can't really see or touch or feel or hear, and it's that kind of intangible sort of sense of place and sense of who we are that we all have here. It's like a sort of, I feel like people from the Isle of Man have a sort of quiet pride and quiet sort of sense of, you know, what we have been in the past and, you know, the direction that we're going in, and, you know, that sort of stoicism, if you like, that's kind of unique, and I really like that.
That's a lovely answer, actually. Yeah, great. And so what would you say, though, what are our main challenges? I think for all that COVID brought out our sense of community, and we undoubtedly have strong community here, you know, we're always quick to help each other, aren't we? Yeah. You know, one of the things I love about the Isle of Man is if, you know, I absolutely know if I lost my purse 10 minutes time, someone would return it to me. You know, it's that, I love that about the island. And so, you know, we were very together, I think, at the start of COVID. I think, you know, recent developments have sadly led us to be a little bit polarised. You know, there are strong opinions on either side about where we should be going. And I think, you know, I think we need to restore some kindness and some respect for other people's opinions. Personally, it's a very personal opinion, you know, but to put yourself in another person's shoes and realise that the last 18 months or so have been different for each and every one of us. And they just,
and then, you know, obviously the economy needs rebuilding. I mean, COVID has affected me badly personally, and I know I'm changed as a result of it, but my sadness is for how it's affected the island and how it's affected the world. You know, people whose businesses were doing well and not doing so well, you know, people have lost loved ones, you know, and so I think there's an awful lot of rebuilding to do in every sense of the word. But I'm sure as an island we've withstood a lot worse, you know, over the centuries, and we will do.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. So what solutions and opportunities do we have to build back better, if you want to use the UK's?
Yeah.
I don't really, but you know.
I mean, obviously, you know, from a Biosphere point of view and from the point of view of my project, I think people have become very conscious of what we have around us and how lucky we are to live here during COVID. You know, I think there's nothing like being told that you can't go out to make you want to go out and sort of stand and look in wonder at something you probably didn't even notice before, you know, go on a walk that you took for granted. You know, so I think people, you know, most of us are a little bit more conscious of what we have, and we value it a little bit more, and I think that's got to be a start point. Beyond that, I'm afraid I would leave it to the politicians. It's but I think, you know, it's not welcome to it. It's a tough, you know, it's a tough job for anyone, isn't it? You know, but I think, you know, it starts with us and how we behave as individuals, doesn't it? You know, and showing a bit of kindness and respect to each other, I think.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. So, what have you got planned next? You know, from the Biosphere's point of view, you've got your strategy, haven't you? What's
from a work point of view, we run a load of existing schemes and initiatives that we're keeping going with, but with our new strategy we've got sort of a good number of headline projects, just a couple of them that I'll mention because, you know, I could fill too much space talking about them all, but we have a week in schools next year, a Biosphere week in our schools, where all our schools will celebrate our Unesco Biosphere status in any way they see fit. So that could be creatively, or it could be, you know, with visits out or projects or videos or whatever. We are launching a Biosphere B, which is a community picnic, kind of where you download your own toolkit and organise your own community picnic, and that's to help social inclusion, connectivity, you know, connecting back up communities that have maybe become a bit fractured or a bit out of touch with each other. Sure. And also encouraging people out into nature in a respectful way where they do no harm, and you know, celebrating local produce, which is a big story for the Isle of Man. Yeah. Arts Council is currently working on a major new collection of art, the first sort of contemporary art collection for several decades, I think, celebrating Biosphere. So that's a sort of joint project which they're very much leading on, but really sort of celebrates my project. And there's lots more to come. So
And are you collaborating with any other bodies on those?
Yeah, I mean, we're run by a stakeholder partnership group, which is chaired by the Chief Minister, and has a good number of sort of government, third sector and private sector bodies on. So we all work collaboratively, and I think that's one of the major things that the Isle of Man is really great at anyway, is collaborating. I think we're all stronger together, aren't we?
Yeah, definitely.
Rather than us all sort of doing our own thing, we're much more effective when we all collaborate and work together. So yeah, we've got a good number of things in the pipeline, a project with the Max Wildlife Trust with whom we work very closely a lot at the time as well.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So we're always open to ideas, and we're always open to people starting their own projects. So that's next at work for me, and we get reviewed as Biosphere in 5 years' time. So work has already started towards that UNESCO review. We're certainly not resting on our laurels about that. We're very much trying to sort of make sure that we have a good periodic review.
Fantastic. Yeah. So well, good luck with that. And
thank you.
We'll put that, like I say, in the show notes. We'll put the link to your strategy document. So
okay,
listeners can look at there. So just moving on finally on to the last few questions. So what books have you read recently, or anything you'd like to recommend as a source of inspiration, or how to fix the planet?
Most of the stuff I read, unless I'm on holiday, which I haven't been of late, is work stuff. So like everybody else, I guess I've got that pile of work reading that sort of teeters on the edge of the desk and kind of falls off onto the floor occasionally, and stuff I mean to read. So I don't read as much for pleasure as I should, or as I would like to. Yeah. But I do. I like contemporary American fiction. I've just discovered a new author actually called Joyce Oates, who is new to me anyway. I haven't read any of her stuff before, so she's pretty fab. I'm not great non-fiction reader. I like to sort of lose myself in a book when I do have the rare luxury to be able to do that. Yeah.
I've got those books. Apparently, it's called self-development, not shelf development. Did you know that?
Oh, see, there are loads and loads of those books, aren't there? The only one of those, these books that I would recommend is one. It's a global bestseller. It's called "Don't Sweat the Small Stuff," and I think it had I think there was a sequel to it as well. And it's just a series of little sort of half-page or one-page affirmations that you can quickly pick up about life. So, if you're feeling a bit jangly or stressed about an issue, pick it up and it sort of calms you immediately, and you think, it's reset me.
Yeah, good. Have you got a favourite quote?
I spoke earlier on about my landlady, who I lived with when I was very young, when I first left home, and it's quite simple really, and I suppose it's quite cliched. Pat Merriman, she was called. She was a marvellous lady, and she said to me, and I wish I remembered it often enough, but she said to me, life is not a dress rehearsal. And often when I'm procrastinating, which I do because I'm a dreadful procrastinator, I'll do that tomorrow or possibly the day after or next year or something, I do think back to that.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. So where can people go to learn more about the Biosphere and more about you and, things that you're up to, the project? We've
got a great revised website, which is much more user-friendly than our old one, which is www.biosphere.im. We're on all forms of social media, although we're just getting to grips with LinkedIn. I wasn't very good with that, so I'm just starting to find out how that works. So you can follow us there. You can call and make an appointment to see us over at DEFA, or give us a call on 686 080.
Great, thanks, Jo. We'll put all those details in the show notes. But in the meantime, thank you so much for telling us your story, coming on and sharing some time today. It's been really great.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's a great series.
Oh, thanks, Jo.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Island Influencers from Thornton Chartered Financial Planners. To find out more and for useful links, visit thorntonfs.com/podcasts.